Okay, thank you very much to the speakers to have taken just the right time, and we have now time for questions and comments from the audience. Unfortunately, Dr. Julie Stout cannot answer directly. Perhaps she can later make some answers on the platform in right form. And we now have some questions, one for Mike. Can visuospatial impairment be a presenting symptom in Huntington's disease?
Well, that's a question I can't really answer because it depends on what you call impairment in this sense. One of the ideas of the presentation I gave was to illustrate how difficult it is to disentangle all these cognitive processes and to know when something. That's also a question that came in. Attention plays a great role for anything that's cognition. So it's very difficult to say, is there something going on in visual spatial? What was the question? Visual spatial. Is there visual spatial impairment? I can just say from my clinical experience, it is quite obvious in people who go on to develop Alzheimer's disease, but I haven't been struck by something similar in people with HD. Unless they were impaired on many different cognitive levels, then visual spatial orientation problems would be part of the whole picture. Jaime, what do you think?
Well, this was a question from Shaima El-Hafari, not mine. But of course, we have to delineate more presentations of Huntington's disease. And many times what you see depends on what you are looking for. And if we neglect some clinical atypical presentations, maybe we have to be more aware that patients with Huntington's disease that are identified for behavioral problems may have some visuospatial problems. But what strikes me more is why, if there is already alterations in the visuospatial processes and alterations in the dorsal and ventral visual stream, and also in posterior cortical, in posterior cortex, why are they not so frequent in clinically, at least? Because we can search for them in research, but at the practical point of view, they are not presenting in everyday clinic. What do you think about?
Yeah, I fully subscribe to this. I mean, you see what you know is there, and unless you look for it, you don't see it. So perhaps we should be on the lookout a bit more and ask the questions to patients and family concerning visual spatial impairments, visual spatial function.
Yeah, you talk about the need for instruments. Do you think that we need a specific instrument, for instance, for memory, a specific instrument for visuospatial or visual alterations in Parkinson's disease, or we have to include items of these in a more general battery that presently we are selecting executive problems and perhaps not giving so much importance to these posterior cortical issues?
Yeah, clearly one should think of what's out there for different purposes, different diseases, what's being used in people who have lesions, such as in stroke, people use when they study visual cognition. Or one could that's available, because I don't think you can find a skill that can do without any motor component. People have to use things, otherwise you don't know how they perform. Maybe there are better ways to account for the other components. Being aware of the other components is the first step to account for them. And then what's left over is really the cognition component. We've recently looked at the SDMT, and predicted function. And loss of function was equally predicted by TMS, so total motor score, and by SDMT, independently, suggesting that while they are closely correlated, SDMT and total motor score, there may be something non-motor component of the scale for function. And that's a very important thing. I'm sure there are more sophisticated approaches.
Yeah. Can you separate, for instance, these executive components in the sense that you may have problems in organizing the visual information because of basal ganglia problems that are more typical of Huntington's disease, instead of a more genuine posterior cortical basis. And perhaps this is not entirely so simplistic to say, this is posterior cortical, this is this executive.
It's not trivial at all. And that's what my confirmed conclusion from doing all the reading and the research and thinking about it. It's not trivial at all.
Okay, there are some questions from the audience to Julie Stout. It's a pity that she cannot directly address, but I think it's important that I read these questions. For instance, Casper van der Zwan, sorry if I not pronounce well, says that attention and memory always seem to go hand in hand in my clinical experience. And the question is, do you control for attentional executive function in your experiments? This is similar to the question that I addressed to you, and perhaps we can try to give a common answer. I think it's not easy to disentangle which is the contribution of these processes. Perhaps neuroimaging may contribute to a clarification of these bases. And another question to Julie is, could loss of autopoietic awareness underlie apathy, at least partially, in Huntington disease, or are they separate entities? Perhaps, Saul, you can talk or assume the role of Julie and talk how apathy may be produced by this lack of autopoietic awareness.
Yeah, well, just coming back to the previous question, asking about the control for attentional executive components when addressing memory impairment. For sure, neuropsychologists are aware about the influence of attention in learning and in memory, and for this reason, from several years ago, we have a lot of tasks, a lot of methods to control how attention affects learning, how frontal related retrieval processes affects the way and how we evoke our memories. And for sure, we have methods to selectively assess semantic and hippocampal dependent or temporal mesial dependent memory, being sure that we are not being influenced by the effects of attention or by the effects of frontal dysfunction. And regarding the second question, it's quite interesting. I never think about it. I'm quite interested in to better understand which components may influence the super expression of apathy in Huntington's disease. One could be the information we have about ourselves, our feelings, our motivations, and linking this that regards to autobiographical memory with this peak of Michael is how we can represent in our minds in a visual imaginary component what we want to do in the future and how it leads to goal-directed behavior. So I think that we are the only animal in the earth that we can construct incentives in our imagination, and incentives lives and moves our behaviors and our motivations. And these pictures in our mind are constructed with a visual cognitive component. and are constructed from our autobiographical and episodic memories. So probably there's something about it in the way of how apathy is, in the etiology of apathy in Huntington's disease.
Yeah, interestingly, and this is also a question for Julie that cannot answer presently, is whether these more alterations that are not so dependent on the basal ganglia are exhibit some response to, for instance, cholinergic replacement, because there is an important alteration, for instance, of the hippocampus and the CA1 area that Julie mentioned in her talk. And perhaps in the present times that we are more entering into personalized medicine, we can select some population of patients with these visuospatial alterations and more Alzheimer's type memory defects, and perhaps more posterior cortical neuroimaging defects. And do you think, both of you, it would be worth to try to make an effort to explore a cholinergic response, in the sense that many interneurons that are cholinergic may be suffering from this, and also taking into account that cholinesterasics were only partially explored in Huntington disease? This is final question.
Well, I think it's certainly interesting to do this. I mean, there's nothing showing that central cholinergic systems are not really affected in HD pathologically. But there's a whole set of, as you say, interneurons that depend on acetylcholine in the cortex. With them, it might be a different story. So looking at this might be interesting. Might be also interested in looking at microstates. So may have, I mean, the brain and imagery and thinking about the future depends on how well different areas of the brain can link up. And usually, if you do this well, these areas are in sync with one another. So if there's desynchronization and how they relate to each other, then of course it can introduce slowness. It can lead to a loss of relevant information that you need at the right time to come up with the right imagination for your future. And this leaves you much the poorer in any of these aspects. So I think it'd be interesting to look at these microfunctional states and link them with structural properties and behavior.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Yeah.